Welcome back to UK Property Info. Today I need to share something with you that has genuinely alarmed me, and I do not say that lightly. I have been tracking the UK rental market for years, watching trends develop and analysing data that helps all of us understand where the property market is heading. But the figures I've been examining over the past few weeks tell a story that is far more urgent than anything I anticipated. Landlords across the United Kingdom are not just leaving the rental market, they are leaving faster than anyone predicted. The forecasts made by industry experts just 12 months ago are already obsolete. The exodus has accelerated beyond all expectations, and the implications for millions of tenants across this country are profound and deeply concerning. Let me take you through exactly what I have discovered and why I believe this represents a genuine emergency for the British rental market. At the beginning of this year, the National Residential Landlords Association conducted their annual survey and found that approximately 30% of landlords were considering reducing their property portfolios over the coming 12 months. That figure was already concerning enough. But when I obtained the latest quarterly data just last week, the picture had changed dramatically. We are no longer talking about 30% considering their options. We are now looking at figures suggesting that nearly half of all private landlords in England are actively taking steps to exit the market or reduce their holdings. The shift from consideration to action has happened in a matter of months, not the years that everyone expected. The speed of this transition is what separates this moment from previous cycles of landlord discontent. I've been covering this market long enough to remember similar warnings in 2016 when Section 24 was announced, and again in 2019 when various regulatory changes came into effect. Each time, the predictions of mass exodus proved somewhat exaggerated. Landlords grumbled, some sold up, but the market adjusted and life continued. This time feels fundamentally different, and I want to explain exactly why I believe we have crossed a threshold from which there may be no easy return. The convergence of pressures hitting landlords simultaneously has created a perfect storm that even the most resilient property investors are struggling to weather. The financial mathematics have shifted with breathtaking speed. Consider what has happened to mortgage costs over just the past 2 years. A landlord who fixed their buy-to-let mortgage in 2021 at a rate of 1.9% is now facing renewal at 5.5% or higher. On a typical £200,000 mortgage, that represents an increase in monthly payments from around £315 to over £900. That is an additional £7,000 per year in mortgage costs alone. Rental income has not kept pace with this increase. While rents have certainly risen, they have not tripled in the way that mortgage costs have. The gap between income and expenditure has widened to the point where many landlords are operating at a monthly loss, subsidising their tenants' accommodation from their own pockets while watching their investment depreciate in value. But the financial squeeze extends far beyond mortgage costs. The tax treatment of rental income has fundamentally changed in ways that many people still do not fully understand. Section 24, which phased in between 2017 and 2020, removed the ability for landlords to deduct mortgage interest from their rental income before calculating tax. Instead, landlords now receive only a basic rate tax credit. For a higher rate taxpayer, this can mean being taxed on rental income that never actually reached their bank account. I have spoken to landlords who are paying tax bills that exceed their actual profit from the property. They are quite literally paying for the privilege of providing rental housing. When you combine this tax treatment with rising mortgage costs, the economics become impossible for many to sustain. The regulatory environment has added another layer of pressure that is driving the acceleration we are witnessing. Over the past decade, successive governments have introduced a cascade of requirements for private landlords. Each individual regulation might seem reasonable in isolation. Electrical safety checks every 5 years. Gas safety certificates annually. Energy performance requirements. Deposit protection schemes. Right to rent checks with potential criminal liability. Licensing requirements in many local authority areas. Smoke and carbon monoxide alarm requirements. The list continues to grow. For a large corporate landlord with dedicated compliance teams, these requirements represent manageable administrative overhead. For an individual landlord with 1 or 2 properties, often someone who bought a property as a pension investment decades ago, the cumulative burden has become overwhelming. The forthcoming Renters Reform Bill has accelerated the exodus dramatically. Even though the legislation has not yet fully passed into law, the anticipation of its provisions has prompted a wave of preemptive selling. The headline measure is the abolition of Section 21 no-fault evictions, which has been portrayed as a victory for tenant security. And for tenants in stable situations with responsible landlords, it may well prove beneficial. But for landlords, the removal of Section 21 represents a fundamental shift in risk profile. Under the current system, if a landlord encounters problems with a property or a tenancy, they have a reliable mechanism to regain possession within a reasonable timeframe. Under the new system, landlords fear they could be trapped in difficult situations for months or even years, while court proceedings drag through an already overwhelmed legal system. I want to be very clear about what is actually happening when landlords sell their properties, because there is a common misconception that needs correcting. When a landlord sells a buy-to-let property, that property does not vanish from existence. The bricks and mortar remain exactly where they were, but in the majority of cases, the property does disappear from the rental market. Research from Hampton's estate agents shows that approximately 2/3 of properties sold by landlords are purchased by owner-occupiers rather than other investors. This means that for every 3 properties leaving landlord ownership, 2 of them are permanently removed from the rental supply. They become someone's home rather than someone's rented accommodation. The net effect is a consistent and accelerating shrinkage of the private rental sector. The numbers on this shrinkage are stark and deeply worrying. At its peak around 2017, the private rented sector in England housed approximately 4.7 million households. The latest figures suggest this has already fallen to around 4.4 million, and the trajectory is pointing sharply downward. We are losing rental properties at a rate of somewhere between 200,000 and 300,000 per year, with some estimates suggesting the pace is accelerating further. Meanwhile, the population continues to grow, household formation continues to increase, and the demand for rental housing shows absolutely no sign of diminishing. The gap between supply and demand is widening at an alarming pace, and nothing in current policy suggests this trend will reverse anytime soon. The human consequences of this supply crisis are becoming increasingly visible across the country. Competition for available rental properties has reached fever pitch in many areas. Estate agents report receiving dozens, sometimes hundreds, of applications for a single property within hours of listing. Prospective tenants are arriving at viewings with full documentation prepared, bank statements ready, references in hand, and checks for 6 months' rent in advance. Even with all this preparation, many are being outbid by other applicants offering more money or presenting stronger financial profiles. The rental market has become a brutal competition, where only those with the strongest resources can succeed, and everyone else is left scrambling for the diminishing scraps. And I have heard countless stories from people caught up in this crisis that would break your heart. A nurse in Birmingham told me she was served notice when her landlord decided to sell, and spent 4 months searching for a new property while continuing to work grueling hospital shifts. She viewed over 50 properties, applied for more than 30, and was rejected time and again. She eventually found somewhere, but it cost £400 more per month and is significantly further from her hospital. A young couple in Leeds described how they had to move back in with parents in their 30s because they simply could not secure a rental property, despite both having good jobs and clean references. A retired teacher in Bristol watched her rent increase by 40% when her fixed term ended, and now spends more than half her pension on housing costs alone. The regional picture adds important nuance to this national crisis. London has been hit particularly hard, as you might expect, with landlord sales reaching record levels across most boroughs. The combination of extremely high property values, capped rental yields, and intense regulatory scrutiny has made the capital especially challenging for landlords. But the assumption that this is primarily a London problem would be dangerously mistaken. Some of the sharpest increases in landlord exits are now happening in cities like Manchester, Birmingham, Leeds and Bristol. Areas that were previously seen as attractive alternatives to London investment are now experiencing the same pressures. The crisis has spread nationwide, affecting urban and rural areas alike, and no region of England is immune from the supply contraction. Scotland and Wales present their own distinct challenges, with regulatory frameworks that in some ways go even further than England. Scotland's rent control provisions in certain areas have created additional uncertainty for landlords, considering new investments or continuing existing ones. Wales has introduced its own registration and licensing scheme with associated costs and compliance requirements. The result is that across all parts of the United Kingdom, the trend is moving in the same direction. Landlords are leaving, and they are leaving faster than anyone predicted just 12 months ago. What makes this acceleration so concerning is the absence of any replacement supply. When landlords exit, someone needs to step in to provide rental housing to meet ongoing demand. Historically, there was always a pipeline of new investors ready to purchase properties and rent them out. This replacement cycle has essentially collapsed. The number of new buy-to-let mortgage applications has fallen to its lowest level in over a decade. Potential new landlords are looking at the same financial calculations, the same regulatory burden, and the same political hostility that is driving existing landlords out, and they are sensibly deciding that there are better places to invest their money. The conveyor belt has stopped, but the demand for rental housing continues unabated. Institutional investors, the large corporate landlords and build-to-rent developers are sometimes presented as the solution to this supply problem. And it is true that institutional investment in rental housing has grown significantly over the past decade. But institutional investors have very specific requirements and preferences that leave large segments of the market unserved. They favour new build developments in major cities, typically apartment blocks with professional management on site. They are not interested in purchasing 3-bedroom semi-detached houses in suburban areas or Victorian terraces in market towns. The type of rental housing that individual landlords have traditionally provided, family homes in established communities, is simply not attractive to institutional capital. When individual landlords exit from these properties, there is no institutional buyer waiting to take their place. The government response to this crisis has been frustratingly inadequate. Ministers continue to speak about protecting tenants and improving rental standards, objectives that few would argue against in principle, but there appears to be minimal understanding of the supply-side consequences of the policies being implemented. Every measure that increases costs for landlords pushes more towards the exit. Every regulation that adds complexity and compliance burden tips more wavering landlords towards selling. Every political statement that portrays landlords as exploitative villains reinforces the sense that investment in rental housing is neither welcome nor valued. The cumulative effect is a policy environment that is actively destroying the rental supply that millions of tenants depend upon for their homes. I want to offer some honest perspective on what the future likely holds because I believe people deserve straight talk rather than false comfort. The acceleration we are witnessing in landlord exits is unlikely to slow in the near term. Interest rates may fall somewhat from current levels, but they are not returning to the near-zero rates that made marginal investments viable. The Renters' Reform Bill will pass in some form, and its provisions will create additional reasons for cautious landlords to exit. The tax treatment is settled, and there is no realistic political appetite to reverse Section 24. Every month that passes sees more landlords reach their personal breaking point and decide that enough is enough. The consequences for tenants will be severe and unavoidable. Rents will continue to rise as shrinking supply meets steady demand. Competition for available properties will intensify further, making the search for rental housing even more stressful and uncertain. Quality may decline in some segments of the market as desperate tenants accept properties they would previously have rejected, reducing the incentive for landlords to maintain high standards. The security that comes from having options and choices will erode as tenants find themselves with fewer and fewer alternatives. Those with the weakest financial resources and the least flexibility will suffer most, pushed towards the margins of an increasingly dysfunctional market. For tenants currently in stable rental situations, my strongest advice is to do everything possible to maintain that stability. If you have a reasonable landlord and a property that meets your needs, cultivating that relationship has never been more valuable. Communicate openly about any issues, pay rent reliably and on time, and make yourself the kind of tenant that a landlord would be reluctant to lose. Moving in this market is stressful, expensive, and uncertain. The security of a stable tenancy is worth protecting and nurturing. If you are searching for a rental property, prepare yourself for an extended and challenging process. Build the strongest possible rental profile with references, proof of income, and savings for deposits and rent in advance. Be flexible on location and property type if your circumstances allow. Start searching well before you need to move, and be prepared to act decisively when opportunities arise. For landlords watching this who are uncertain about their own position, I want to offer some honest reflection. The financial and regulatory pressures I have described are real, and they are not temporary. If you are currently operating at a loss, or if the stress of compliance and management has become unbearable, there is no shame in concluding that the time has come to exit. The market conditions that made buy to let an attractive proposition have fundamentally changed, and hoping for a return to the old normal is likely to prove futile. However, for landlords with low leverage, strong cash flow, and genuine willingness to operate professionally, there remains a viable business model in rental property. The reduction in competition from other landlords will eventually support yields, and well-managed properties in sensible locations will continue to find tenants. The key is being honest with yourself about whether your particular circumstances and appetite for the role align with the new reality. The title of this report describes what we are seeing as landlords exiting faster than expected, and I want to conclude by emphasizing just how significant that acceleration is. The forecasts made by industry bodies, by government analysts, by property market experts, including myself, have consistently underestimated the pace of this exodus. What was expected to unfold over years is happening in months. What was predicted as gradual adjustment has become rapid contraction. The private rental sector is shrinking faster than almost anyone anticipated, and the consequences are being felt right now by millions of tenants across this country who depend on private landlords for their homes. Thank you for watching this UK Property Info Market Alert. If you found this analysis valuable, please subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you receive updates as this situation develops. The rental market is changing rapidly, and we will continue to track developments and provide the honest, data-driven analysis that helps you make informed decisions. Share this video with anyone who rents, anyone who is a landlord, and anyone who cares about housing in this country. Leave your comments below with your own experiences of the rental market. Are you a landlord considering your options? Are you a tenant struggling to find a property? Your stories help us understand the real-world impact of these market dynamics and ensure we are covering the issues that matter most to you. Until next time, this is UK Property Info, helping you navigate the most challenging property markets in a generation. Iwami.